Hello, everybody. I'm Nicholas. Part already told you pretty much everything about me. I hadn't realized that I've been into PHP for 21 years, which sounds like quite a lifetime. Uh, if the skill was a person, it could be in the US and be of legal drinking age, which is quite a long time, actually. But today I'm here to talk about to talk to you about scheduled tasks and how you can use them to automate your Joomla site. So let's start with defining what we mean with Joomla automation. Automation, according to the dictionary, is a technique for making an apparatus, a process, or a system operate automatically, the state of being operated automatically, or what we're interested in, automatically controlled operation of an apparatus, process, or system by mechanical or electronic devices that take the place of human labor. And that's the important bit, because Joomla automation means that you're letting your site do the work for you. Now, what kind of work? Like, it could be removing unnecessary users that have tried to create a user account, never activated, or haven't visited your site in forever. You could be taking backups of your site, so if something happens, you can restore it from the backup. If you have a help desk component which is able to receive emails from your users and send your replies back as emails, you could automate this processing of emails. You could even automatically move or archive articles after a certain amount of time, like what, for example, you would be doing in a magazine. The previous month's articles would be automatically moved into a category, for example, June 2022. Really, sky's the limit when you're trying to automate Joomla, or anything for that matter. Joomla automation is not something that we just invented in Joomla 4. It has been around ever since Joomla itself has been around, really. And there have been several automation methods before Joomla 4 came out. There have been CLI scripts. These run on the command line, and they can be automated with something called cron. There have been some automation URLs, or cron URLs if you want, or web cron as some people call it, which is a URL that when you try to access it, it does something. And of course, there have been bespoke APIs like the one that we have created for Akeeba backup. They all have pros and cons. So, for example, CLI scripts are really fast in how they execute, and they can be very easily automated with cron jobs on your server. However, at the same time, you need to know what is the path to the PHP CLI executable for the same PHP version as your site runs. So first, you need to know which PHP version you're using, and second, you need to know how to use the same PHP version from the command line. You need to be able to find the path to the CLI script that you're going to be executing to perform this kind of automation, which is something non-obvious, and you will probably need to ask your host to help you with. There are configuration arguments in the command line itself, which might be a bit confusing to work your head around unless you are familiar with setting up and using command line environments. And there are, of course, some hosts that don't have real cron. They don't allow you to schedule the execution of command line scripts. Then you have the difficulty of being able to tell cron when to run it, when to run that script, because cron accepts some weird arguments for historic reasons, like the minute, the hour, the month, day of the month, day of the week, which sounds really complicated, and it's really hard to wrap your hand around. Like, if I want to execute something once a day at 3 p.m., what do I need to do? It's really complicated. Then, of course, we have the cron URLs, which are a bit easier to understand because it's just a standard URL that you're already familiar with by virtue of using the internet all those years. Their configuration is typically inside the extension instead of URL parameters, so it's more user accessible. However, you will need to automate them again with a cron job using an external utility like wget or curl, which for some people might sound like I'm speaking in tongues. I swear to you, I'm not speaking in Greek right now. That's what these tools are called. You can, of course, use a third-party service like WebCron to automate the execution of these URLs, which is easier, but also costs money. And the more of these cron URLs that you need to execute, the more money you're going to pay. And this can become quite expensive after a while. Those third-party services can also be an obscure source of action. And by that, I mean that you may have forgotten that you have set it up. And suddenly, when you try to move your site to a different domain name, you might see that an action is still executed on the old site and have no idea where it comes from. And believe me, this is something that we see at least 3 times every year when we're doing support. So it's not as unlikely as you might want to think. The URLs are also a bit slower because you need to run the entirety of Joomla before you can start doing any work. And of course, they are susceptible to timeouts from the web server or PHP itself. And last but not least, third-party extension and especially plugins may end up breaking those URLs. The third legacy method that I talked about was bespoke APIs, like the one we use in Akeeba Backup for the Akeeba Backup JSON API. They are fast because they are purpose-made. You do not need to run the cron job on your server. They usually provide features beyond mere scheduling of some actions, but at the same time, they need a bespoke client, be it some kind of software that you need to run on a computer or a third-party service, which costs money. And when you're using a third-party service, just like cron URLs, the source of action can be obscured, and you may wonder, why is this happening? Where does this action come from? A solution to all of that is Joomla's scheduled tasks feature, which was introduced in Joomla 4.1. Scheduled tasks are handled entirely by Joomla itself. So Joomla handles what, when, and whether to run it, how to run it, that is the configuration of the task. It can even send you emails whenever the task succeeds or fails. You can even set up some special tasks, like tasks that you will only use once through the interface, or have to be manually toggled but not automatically, or tasks that can only run under the CLI but not from a URL, or anything like that. However, task scheduling means that Joomla needs to execute periodically some tasks. But Joomla is not an operating system, right? It's a CMS. It's something that when you access a URL or run a script, it does something. Therefore, you need a triggering method that will be running periodically, see if there are any pending tasks, execute them, and return. So you need at least one triggering method to be active on your site. Unlike the legacy scheduling methods that I described before, this is something that you only need to do once, no matter how many different tasks you need to execute. So even though it may sound a bit complicated, it's something that you only do once. How do you set up this kind of trigger for the Joomla schedule tasks? Well, I would normally tell you to read the documentation. However, Joomla's documentation on this feature is non-existent at the time that we're making this presentation. There is absolutely nothing whatsoever. I have even included the URL. If you visit it, it will be like, these are a couple of headers and there is nothing. I have written my own documentation. I have provided a short link here, akeeba.pa/scheduled tasks. This is the documentation for Akeeba backup, but I actually documented the entire Joomla scheduled tasks feature exactly because Joomla itself didn't. And I'm going to go through a rather quick walkthrough of how these triggers are set up so you have an idea instead of trying to read a very long document. There are three ways. The first way is by using cron jobs, a CLI script. You need to set up one and only one cron job to run every minute, and that will be processing the tasks queue, which means that Joomla will figure out if something needs to be executed and do that, or just say, I have no work to do, bye-bye. You can optionally make a CLI task to a cron job to run just a specific Joomla schedule task at a specific date and time, but I do not recommend that because it can get complicated, and also there is no reason to do that. I mean, Joomla schedule task is meant to replace that complicated thing. This is the fastest triggering method. It is the most resilient to third-party extensions and whatnot, and it requires minimal maintenance. Every year or two, when you change your PHP version, you will just need to update this one and only one cron job with a new PHP version. That's it. The only downside is that it still requires you to set up a cron job. The command is PHP path to your site /CLI/Joomla PHP scheduler run -- all. The path to PHP is the path to your PHP version CLI executable, which you need to get from your host. And the path to your site is the absolute file system path to your site's web root that you also need to get from your host. If you actually show this slide to your host and tell them, hey, I want to run this once every minute, they should be able to tell you, okay, go there, type that, click that, and it's done. The other triggering method is what Joomla calls web cron, basically a cron URL. So as you remember, this was also one of the legacy scheduling methods. Unlike the legacy scheduling methods, you only need to set this one cron job to access one specific URL every minute to process the task queue. You don't need to create a different URL and a different cron job for each and every task that you want to execute. And yes, you can also create a URL to just trigger one specific task, but it's not recommended because it's pointless. The downside is that you still need to set up a cron job with wget or curl, or use whatever your hosts provide to access a URL periodically. And the major drawback is that you shouldn't even think about using a third-party service to schedule that, because it can get very, very expensive. There are too many minutes in a day. And if you're paying for every execution every minute, you will probably end up paying something, if I recall correctly, to the tune of $200 per month, which is absurd. So setting up the web cron needs a round trip first to Joomla's interface, you go to System, Manage, Schedule Tasks, Options. There in the Web Cron tab, you set Web Cron to enabled. You click on the Save button, and then there is this Web Cron link base option with a nice copy button next to it. You click on copy, and you get a URL that looks a bit like this. The only thing that changes from one side to the other is that hash, which is basically a password that only applies to your site. Then you just need to ask your host how you can make this URL get accessed every single minute. I give you an example with curl. Maybe your host has an easier way to do that. Like some host told you, okay, just give us a URL and how often you want us to run it, and we'll do it. If unsure, just ask your host. It's usually very easy for them to set it up. And the third triggering option that Joomla gives you for schedule tasks is what they call the lazy scheduler. Now, the lazy scheduler is very simple. You just flip a switch and task will execute automatically. That sounds a bit like magic, right? I just said that Joomla is a CMS, it's not an operating system. So how exactly does the lazy scheduler work automatically? Well, this is its downside. The tasks, the lazy scheduler, only executes when there is visitor traffic on your site, which means that if nobody's visiting your site, nothing runs. If you try to execute some tasks when your site is not in heavy use, like in the middle of the night, these tasks may not execute at all, or they may execute at a different time. Like you schedule something for midnight, it might execute at 3 in the morning because someone just accessed your site at 3 in the morning, don't know. If a task needs more time to execute, so it needs to be split up in smaller tasks, these tasks will take a long time between them to run. So the total execution time for a very long running task might stretch from a few minutes to a few hours. And you're far more likely to end up running tasks when your site is very busy and has already high resource usage. It might not work with some caching setups, like CDNs, which cache the entirety of your page, like Cloudflare, or some caching proxies and third-party caching solutions which completely bypass Joomla when they deliver the page. If Joomla and its system plugins do not execute when visitors access your site, then lazy scheduler won't run. And you should not really use it for long-running tasks or tasks which demand data consistency or are time sensitive. Because as I said, you cannot control exactly when they execute and how long it will take them to execute. So if you're trying to take a backup like that, your backup might not complete at all throughout the entire day. If you're trying to update your e-commerce catalog with new prices, you want that to happen as fast as possible. You don't want to have a half-updated catalog, so some of the products have the right price and some don't, right? If you're sending newsletters, you want everybody to receive the newsletter as close in time to each other as possible, instead of someone receiving the newsletter now and someone else receiving the newsletter 3 days later. So lazy scheduler is good for many things, but not for everything. So how do you set up the lazy scheduler? Again, you need to go to the Joomla interface. You go to the system menu item from the sidebar, click on find the manage area, click on Schedule Tasks, click on the Options button, and then you go to the Lazy Scheduler tab, and you set Lazy Scheduler to Enabled. The next option you need to concern yourself with is the request interval, which sounds very technical and very inaccessible. This is basically how soon after the last time I checked for tasks should I check again. The default is 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. That's a bit too long. I would set it to 30 or 60 seconds. Then you just click on Save and Close, and, well, that's it. That's all you need to set up the Lazy Scheduler. Now, setting up the trigger may sound and look complicated, but you only ever need to do this once. Unlike other automation methods, the legacy automation methods before Joomla 4, where you had to do this every single time you wanted to set up a new task. So this is the major benefit of using Joomla schedule tasks. If you can't decide which triggering method you should use, I have a very simple flowchart here. Are you afraid to ask any question to your host? If you are, just use lazy scheduling. If you're not, ask them, do you support cron? If they tell you yes, use the CLI Cron job. If they tell you no, we don't support cron, well, do you schedule? Are you able to schedule accessing URLs? If they tell you yes, use the web cron. If they tell you no, while you're looking for a new host that actually knows what they're doing, you can use lazy scheduling. It's so simple. Now, let's see how you can set up the actual tasks to execute, the actual things that get automated, which is easy peasy lemon squeezy according to my 4-year-old. Scheduling a task is basically 2 easy steps. You make sure that its plugin in the task group is published, and then you go to the system menu, find the manage area, click on schedule tasks, and click add and set it up. And we'll see just 3 short examples. For the first example, we see how we can remove unnecessary users with Admin Tools Professional. When you install Admin Tools, it also installs a plugin called Task Admin Tools. Make sure that it's published. Then go to the System menu, Manage, Schedule Tasks. Click on the new button up there and select which kind of task you want to execute. In our case, it's Admin Tools, delete inactive users. You get to a simple configuration page like that. In this case, I chose to execute it once every 3 days at 30 minutes past midnight. And remember that the execution time is in UTC. This is the same as GMT, which might not be the same as the time zone you live in. The task parameters is what we define in our task plugin. When to delete inactive users, only if they haven't activated their account. If someone has activated their account, I don't mind. How many days we give them before we delete their account? 7 days. Done. Click on Save and Close. Yep, that's it. If you want to test the task and make sure that it runs, click on the Run Test. And done. That was easy, right? Nothing complicated. Wow. For the second example, I'm going to show you how you can take backups with Akeeba Backup Professional. Again, when you install Akeeba Backup Professional, it installs a plugin called Task Akeeba Backup. Make sure that it's published. Again, go to System, Manage, Schedule Tasks, click on the new button, and when you are asked to select which kind of task you want, just select Akeeba Backup, take a backup. Now, I want to show you that schedule task can also support the very complicated cron job format of defining when something should run. So in this case, I have something which runs at 1:30 in the morning every day of every month, no matter what the day of the week is. Or I could have just selected to run it on interval 1 day at 1:30, like I had done with a previous task. I just want to show you different options of when to execute something. And the only task parameter that you get for Akeeba backup is, okay, which backup profile do you want? Because everything else is set up in the backup profile. Click on Save and Close, and your site will be backing up itself. Done. There are, of course, third-party plugins. There is a plugin called KickTemp. If you go to the Facebook Joomla group, you will see a link to that. It can automatically move or archive articles after a while. So I installed the plugin. It's the task kick manage article. I make sure that it's enabled. Again, I create a new schedule task. I select its task type, kick manager article, move articles. And in the configuration page, I have set it up so after 6 months, it moves articles from the blog category to the archives. Save and close, and every day at 3 in the morning, it will automatically archive all the articles. I don't have to bother myself with it. And this is done. And the final example, you can trigger cron URLs of any other component because, hey, not all components have been updated for Joomla 4. So what do? If a component doesn't support Joomla schedule task, but gives you a web cron URL, well, the plan is very simple. Find the cron URL of the component. I have an example URL here that's completely made up, and set up a schedule task of the type get request. This is saved with Joomla. It's the plugin task requests. So make sure that the task request plugin is published. Yes, it is. Create a new Joomla schedule task. Select get request as the type. Perfect. Enter the request URL. The request timeout is how long we should wait for that URL to return before saying it's kind of stuck, dude. So I set it to 2 minutes, which is the default. Have it run every 1 hour. Why not? Save and close. Done. The get request task type will also work with third-party services. And now I think that for some of you, the gears are spinning in your heads and think, well, I do have some third-party stuff that I can access with an API URL, right? Yes. And you can use Joomla to have those URLs get accessed every so often to do things automatically, right? And this is how you can automate Joomla and third-party services with Joomla scheduled tasks. So now I can take your questions. If Part will be able to relay them.
Definitely, I'll do that. So I see one question that's actually already answered by Brian on the chat, but I'll take it anyways. So I think it's just a general question that he's been using Joomla Akeeba Backup Pro for a long time. He's wondering if the WordPress version has a similar UI.
If the WordPress version, sorry?
Does the WordPress version have a similar UI?
No, because WordPress does not actually have scheduled tasks. They only have a CLI client, WP CLI. We have integration with WP CLI.
Yeah, I think his question was general about Akeeba Backup's UI, not so much about the specific to the session. It was like a generic question to you about Akeeba Backup's WordPress UI versus Akeeba Backup's Joomla UI. Are they similar?
Yes, they are. They have the same features. They have the same design language. The only thing that's really different is the CSS framework they're using there for the colors. But that's about it.
Okay. So I had one question. So you mentioned earlier that you don't really recommend using this when you want to do time critical tasks. So could you elaborate on that? And if you can't use that, what's the other way to do it?
Okay, so the problem with lazy scheduling is that you can't control exactly when something will execute because it depends on having user traffic. So if nobody accesses your site between midnight and 3 a.m., any task that you have said that it needs to run, let's say at 30 past midnight or at 1:15 a.m., it won't execute because there was no traffic to
Nothing
tell
getting.
to tell the lazy scheduling that it needs to do anything. So bummer. So this task may execute whenever you next have traffic, which might be like 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning. And if it was time critical, like I need to have my site submit this financial information to the IRS by this time, and it doesn't execute, and if I don't do that, I get a fine, you get a fine. More realistically, you would probably want to update your e-commerce prices before the bot that scans the prices for Google or local services. Like in Greece, we have Scrooge, which is basically a price comparison site and e-commerce platform, like a mini Amazon. Let's say that you know that it will scan your site at 3 in the morning. You want to update your prices by then, because if it scans your site and you haven't updated yet, it still gets the old prices, which might cost you sales. So if it's time critical, don't rely on lazy scheduling. It's unpredictable. If it's time critical, you need to use one of the other two methods, which are very accurate in when things execute once a minute.
Makes sense. Makes sense. We do have one more question. That's from Nathaniel. He's saying great presentation. I'm wondering if Joomla's new workflow can be used to set up automation. So that's workflows. Yeah.
Yeah. No, workflows was created for state management, not actual automation, not automation by executing arbitrary tasks. So workflows is like if an author submits an article, what are the next steps that need to be taken before it can be published? None of those steps can be execute a scheduled task. And based on the architecture of that component, I don't think that it can actually happen.
So would there be a use case around this, Nick, where one of the state changes was actually time-based? So for example, let's say, consider that, article gets published, it's featured, but of course, featured is not really a state, but that's just an example that you feature every article for one day and then you unfeature it or something like that.
It's actually easier to approach it the opposite way. Instead of thinking it as part of a workflow, you can think of it as part of a standalone action. Like, I know when is the last modified date of an article, and I know its state. So if the state of an article is published and its last modified date is within the last 3 days, then its featured must be 1. If it's not, update it. Yeah. So even though it's not really an action that would run during the workflow, it's an action that you can schedule to run every half an hour. So every half an hour, you could feature the articles that were published in the last half hour.
Yeah. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question, Nathaniel. We have one more from Ankit. So he's asking, how does it handle time zones?
How does it handle time zones? Well, the answer is it doesn't. Everything is in UTC. Everything is UTC is the universal time, which is the same as GMT, the Greenwich. I don't know the English word for that.
Greenwich time, you mean? Yeah.
I remember it's just a Greek word for that, but it's you know that your local time has an offset from the GMT. If you don't know it, go to timeanddate.com, enter your city, and you will find it. So that's how you can handle time zones. Joomla is like, everything is GMT. I don't care.
Yeah. You could, I think in your task, you'll have to actually respect the global configuration for your site's time zone setting and make sure that
Eh, So because I've had that discussion with clients, and I try to do that. So we have a site which is hosted in Texas.
yeah.
It is for a European company based in Frankfurt. Its administrator is in Bangalore, and its technical director is in New York, which is the site's time zone.
So in fact, I remember that we had actually done a session on time, specifically on time. So this doesn't really relate to Joomla, but any web application that you do. And it's actually a very interesting thing, especially when you add daylight saving into the mix. But so well, I'll try to at least, I'm not answering the question, so to say, because I don't think there is an answer to that question directly. But it's interesting how Joomla tries to at least give you some tooling for that. So you have a global configuration to set the default time zone for the site, so to say. And for every user in user parameters, you're actually able to set the time for that user. And we have handled this in a very interesting ways for our event ticketing extension, because that can go really crazy when you're wanting to schedule events. So if I'm in Bangalore in India and I want to schedule an event which starts at 9 a.m. Bangalore time, which will have users coming from, let's say, US, from New York. So what do? Do you listen to the browser's time zone? Do you listen to, if the user is logged in, should you pick up his time zone? Because he could be traveling, right? So he could be normally in Europe, but right now he's in New York. So his Joomla time zone will tell you that, he's actually from Europe. Like,
Yep.
hey, he's in Europe right now. So actually, Google Calendar does a nice job of it. If you switch time zones, it will actually detect based on browser time zone and tell you that, hey, do you want to change it? So you'll have to build tooling around it. So I think Joomla gives you the infrastructure for it. You will have to build on top. That's, I think, how I would do it.
Yeah. We do something similar. We actually default to what the user has selected in their user profile.
Yeah.
But the reality is there are always cases when whatever you think is not what the user meant. So unless we have a brain to browser interface, the best thing that you can do is ask the user, what is your time zone?
Yeah.
And if the user doesn't know, okay, do you want me to use UTC?
Absolutely. Yeah. Time is an interesting concept, I think. I think we could probably do like a full panel discussion on time and software. So that's a very, very broad
You
thing.
know what they say. There are three very difficult things in programming: time zones and off by one errors.
And what?
Time zones and off by one errors.
Yeah. Right. So we have one more question here, Nick. So that's from Mark. He's
Yes,
asking, when do lazy triggered tasks run? Before or after the stuff the user wanted?
in parallel, actually. So the way Joomla handles that is that it does an XML HTTP request back to the server from the HTTP page that the user created. So they do not execute as part of the request. They are triggered by the visitor's browser.
Yeah.
Which of course also means that if the browser blocks that request, because like they have no script or something similar, then again, the task do not execute.
So this will be an async request. Nick? It's like a Ajax async request.
Yes.
Because I remember we used to have a lot of problems. I mean, we have a lot of extensions that send out emails. So we have something called as invitex, and then there is something called as Gmail alerts. And we used to always ask people to set crons, and we got a ton of tickets because nobody set crons and they said nothing's going. So as a solution to that, we introduced a system plugin which would, batch out and send it when people hit it. So kind of like a lazy scheduler. But then, of course, when you have high traffic sites, that can cause your site to slow down, and that can
Yep.
cause problems. So it was a solution we gave to reduce support, but we always said that, this is just to make sure you don't ask us for support, but cron is the right way to do it using a CLI. Do we see issues with lazy loading if we have a ton of tasks there, that it will affect end user performance? Though I know it's a sync, but what do you think?
No. It will normally not affect the end user performance more than like fractional millisecond. The reason is that when Joomla starts a request, it locks the table, checks when was the last time it checked for tasks, updates any information, then unlocks the table.
Okay.
Which means that any other simultaneous requests during that table lock period wouldn't be able to do anything. So it's guaranteed that approximately one request will only ever update this, with the asterisk that it's up to MySQL's table locking code to not screw up.
Yeah.
And you know that MySQL's table locking code in very high request per minute environments is so and so. So if you have a high traffic site, I think it is suicidal to rely on lazy scheduling.
Absolutely.
If you run this kind of site, you know to avoid it. So I'm not worried about that. If you lazy scheduling is mostly for the sites that have that are on really bad hosts. They don't offer proper CLI cron jobs. They don't offer a way to even schedule URLs. So what is their option? Their only option is to have lazy scheduling, which will not work all that well, but whatever.
So it's a band-aid solutions for bad hosts, not
Yes.
recommended where you have better options.
Yes. It's better to spend like a day talking to your host to set up one of the other trigger methods than rely on lazy scheduling and try to work around all the problems that it creates.
Yeah, I'd agree completely with that. So we have one more question from Amol. So he's asking, schedule task failure is handled by Joomla, or a plugin developer will need to take care of that? For example, if a schedule task fails, will I as an admin get an email notification, and will that be handled on the framework level, or does that need to be taken care of by the somebody who's writing the task plugin?
So the person who's writing the task plugin needs to return the status of the task execution. One of the statuses is failed. So Joomla will know that the task has failed. If the task doesn't complete at all, during the next execution, Joomla will see that and mark it as failed. When Joomla sees that the task is failed, it looks at the task definition. What should I do when the task is failed? One of the options is send me an email. So you can receive an email.
Yeah, so that's there out of the box. The email triggers are there, but it's
Yes.
up to the plugin developer to ensure that he's setting the task status correctly.
Yeah, so even if PHP crashes for some reason, then Joomla schedule task will be able to still send you a notification, except for some really weird edge cases that would end up corrupting the information in the database. But okay, yes, this will happen, like 1 in 10,000 sites. What can you do?
Yeah. So I think that's really great that the email notification system is inbuilt, and as long as plugins are written correctly, it will the facility will be there where the administrator is able to monitor this without having to visit the website.
Yep.
So we have a follow-up question from Mark. So this is related to how does scheduling work, the lazy scheduling work. So he's asking, isn't that a bit odd? When a user hits a page, it starts Joomla. Why not make an async call from example index.php and handle that? So that's the question.
Okay, so first of all, Joomla is not asynchronous at all. Sorry, PHP actually. PHP is not asynchronous at all. There are asynchronous packages for PHP, but they are pseudo-asynchronous. They just fork a process, and there is a main process that just waits for all of them. You could run, you could try to access a URL from index.php, but you would still have to wait until it returns. So it would actually take longer than executing the tasks. If that was, even if that was Dart or C#, which do have asynchronous requests, or even JavaScript, these are the languages that I have used that have async, you would still need to finish executing your task within the time that you're preparing the request response. You wouldn't be able to fork off a process and let it run by itself without having a parent process. Being able to fork off like that would require different privileges, which are very dangerous to have in something that can be triggered over the web. So not really, no. You can't do this, and you shouldn't be able to do this, so it's not done.
Hey, thanks, Nick. So we have another follow-up question from Ankit. I think we probably still need to handle the time question. So now the question is that, so it handles it with the Joomla global time zone, or it will still take UTC? That's the question.
UTC. It actually says so in the label. It says UTC. So there are no misconceptions about what you need to enter.
Yeah. So it has to be UTC, Ankit. Yeah, so those are all the questions we have. So we still have some time. If there are any more questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to ask me something, I'm here.
Yeah, so there is one from one follow-up from Mark. So how does the Ajax do it then? He's asking. This is again a follow-up on the how the works.
So the way it works is the system plugin for scheduled tasks injects a piece of JavaScript in the document's head, which has the browser execute an AJAX request. But it's the browser doing that. It is not the server, which means that the server has finished its reply before the lazy scheduler runs. That request goes to the browser, and as the browser executes the JavaScript, it gets to the point that it has to do an asynchronous request. So it's the user's browser doing the request, not your server.
Yeah.
Therefore, your server hasn't spent more than a couple of milliseconds processing the creation of this little snippet of JavaScript. That's all. Now, for the internals on how that request works, you need to read the Joomla's code. Last time I did, it was before they made a few changes to improve it, so I cannot tell you off the top of my head how they handle authentication.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Mark. Thank you so much for the elaborate answer, Nick. So I think those are the questions we have for today. And if there are any more questions, I think maybe you can reach out on, okay, there is one more. So how does it handle timeouts in script execution? That's from Ankit.
Okay, so there are two different timeouts that you need to keep in mind. One is the PHP timeout. That's easy. You just tell PHP to set timeout to 0, so it's practically infinite. And the second is the web server timeout, meaning that the web server, if it doesn't receive a response within a preset period of time, which is usually 120 or 180 seconds, it will try to kill the process that it called the PHP. For the latter issue, Joomla schedule tasks installs a handler for PHP's message for user cancellation of the request and tells it to not honor it, so continue running. So it will continue running past that timeout. Of course, there is also a third timeout that you cannot escape, which is the server's maximum CPU usage time. This is one of the user limits that you set up in etc/security/ulimit.conf if I remember correctly. On most hosts, this is also set to 180 seconds. So if your task is trying to do something for more than 3 minutes, it will fail. Practically, how me as a task plugin writer handle it. If I know it is something that's very fast, I don't care, I don't do any special handling. If it's something that I know will take a while, for example, taking a backup, usually takes several minutes or several hours. I can execute a part of the work and then return the task status resumable. I need you to call me again because I haven't finished running. So next time the scheduler runs, it will see that my task hasn't finished and will call me again. And I will perform another chunk of the work and so on and so forth until I return either an error status or an OK status. So if you know that what you're trying to do takes more than a couple of seconds, you need to write your plugin as a resumable task. If you don't write your plugin as a resumable task, you can bet that it will time out. And I would say anything that takes over 10 seconds is bound to get a timeout on a significant amount of sites. That will become a headache to the person writing the task plugin based on experience.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Ankit, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, and I think that's it. I think unless we get one more, but I think
I just want to say that there is a URL here. I got it this time. There's a URL here. This URL doesn't work just yet. I will upload the presentation later today.
Perfect. Nick,
and you will have it as a PDF, so you can reference everything I said, the links I gave, etc.
That's perfect. And this video will be live. So we'll be editing out some parts, but this video will be live on the YouTube channel as well for you to refer back. And in the comment section, we'll also link back to the presentation so that it's easy to find. So thank you so much, Nick. I think it was wonderful to have you and hear you after such a long time. So your sessions are ones that we have never missed when we have been at conferences together. And it's really a pleasure to hear from you. Always very practical, great advice. And I'm sure the audience has really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And hand over
last slide.
Yeah, that's from Looney Tunes. So Amir, over to you for concluding the session. Thank you so much again, Nick. Really fantastic.
Thank you.
See you again.
Hey, thank you, Nicholas, for joining the Joomla NXT event and delivering an insightful session on automate Joomla with scheduled tasks. So it was a pleasure to host you, and we look forward to speaking more often with you on these forums. So we'd like to take this opportunity to share an update that we are coming up with another interesting session in the month of September. So Yannick Gaultier from Webler, so he'll be delivering an insightful talk on modern SEO practices on Joomla with 4 SEO. Also, thank you to our lovely audience. We really appreciate for taking the time today to hear us and to be a part of our Joomla NXT series. Please stay tuned with our social media handles, and we'll be posting more such updates regarding our upcoming events and also regarding our products and offerings. Thank you a lot. Looking forward to hearing you from many of these events. Thank you. Thank you
Hey,
for attending Joomla.
thanks everyone. Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you again, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. See you in the next event. Bye bye.